Hey, this is Josh West from X1 Magazine. I recently had the opportunity to get hands-on with Shinji Mikami's latest, The Evil Within. It's a survival horror game coming to Xbox One and Xbox 360 later this year. So what's it like? Well, it's tense, atmospheric, and at times incredibly stressful to endure. Basically, it's everything you could have ever hoped this father of survival horror games would deliver. And why do they call Mikami that, you might be asking? Well, it probably has something to do with his legacy. Not only was he responsible for the game that started it all, Resident Evil back in 1996, more recently and in many ways more importantly, Resident Evil 4. That's the game that reinvented horror games for a new generation, and it's important to note because The Evil Within bears many similarities to Resident 4, the control system and cinematic style in particular. So the big question on your mind is no doubt this: does The Evil Within match Resi when it comes to tense action and butt-clenching scares? Or if there are any doubts on Mikami's ability to leave the player in a mess of stress and bodily fluids, The Evil Within should put an end to such nonsense talk. Just don't come in expecting a revolutionary experience. Just an incredibly scary one. Don't believe us? This is just a little example of the sort of jump scares you can expect, well, every 30 to 50 seconds. When you're in a dark room wearing headphones, this is the sort of thing that really messes you up. Not cool, Mikami. Then again, that's not a shock. Mikami is renowned for scaring the living hell out of us. Perhaps the biggest surprise here is just how thoroughly unsurprising The Evil Within is. That isn't to say it is an assault on the subconscious, because it absolutely is, but when so many of the ideas and mechanics feel like a retread of things we've seen before, things like scary looking villagers, walls turning to skin and peeling, unstoppable enemy forces and the echoes of children's laughter, between Silent Hill and Resi, we've seen it all and experienced it all. That doesn't necessarily make its horror any less effective though. So I've played through 2 chapters of Evil Within. The first demonstrated its action sensibilities, while the second was a crawl through a creepy mansion. It's full of jump scares, puzzles and careful movements. But you know what, let's tackle the most controversial aspect of the game first. Its action. While you're never without some heavy weaponry, ammo is incredibly scarce. The guns feel weighty and they sound incredible, and going 1 versus 1 against the sort of disfigured villagers is a seriously tense experience. Against multiple foes, however, the mechanics fall apart a little. There doesn't seem to be like a 180-degree swivel that we last saw in Resi 4, which makes managing large groups difficult, especially when you consider that you need to burn corpses to stop them from reanimating. The Evil Within wants to convincingly merge action and horror, then the action mechanics need to be tightened up, which could be a part of why the game has been delayed until October. Thankfully, the second half of our playthrough inspired much more confidence. In fact, it brought The Evil Within to life. We strut into a huge mansion, not unlike the one seen in Raccoon City 2 decades ago. There's complicated puzzles blocking the way, lights flicker and enemies could be waiting around any and every corner. This is when we began emptying clips out of fear. That click 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 sound of the empty chamber is the last thing you want to hear when you find yourself up a certain creek without a paddle. In this second chapter, subversion became Mikami's greatest weapon against the player, but The Evil Within seems to have an identity problem overall. When The Evil Within went pure horror, the mechanics, systems and sublime level design merged together to create an undeniably intense and at times breathtaking experience. When it swung towards action, the gunplay and movement didn't seem to support the fluidity that gameplay requires to be satisfying. It's this duality that could be The Evil Within's undoing. Then again, we've only played 2 parts of a much larger narrative. There's every chance that the action sections are a welcome palate cleanser to the unrelenting horror that pervades every other inch of the game. When The Evil Within sacrificed itself to the purity of survival horror, it became something we just weren't prepared for. We're not going to find out any more until October 21st when it launches on Xbox One and Xbox 360 though.